What a difference 2 years can make, I'll explain and we'll discuss on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We'd love for you to leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts if you're a fan of the show. And we're on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, 20 plus years at the Fox Sports Radio Network. Also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Well, happy anniversary to me. I found out today that it is the 2-year anniversary of me taking over as the host of Locked On LA Kings. Thanks to the Locked On Network for the very nice post that they put out for me on X and Twitter. I honestly did not know that today was the anniversary. I have put a lot of work. At times it's been challenging, but always fun into this show. I think my favorite thing about hosting this show has been meeting other Kings fans, whether it's in person at games or through emails and social media posts and things like that. I think doing this show has made me a more informed Kings fan, and hopefully I've helped to make you a more informed Kings fan as well. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I'm happy to see how the show has grown and how we've continued to get more and more listeners and viewers. The feedback I've gotten since taking over has been 99.9% positive, I would say, from both fans and from people who run the network. But I did want to say on this 2-year anniversary, thanks to all the people who have joined the show as guests, and most importantly, thanks to you for helping make this show fun and successful, and looking forward to keeping it going for the next few years or so, however long it goes, still having fun with it. And hopefully you're still enjoying it as well. Our views on YouTube, our downloads on the podcast have been amazing, especially so far this off season. Usually you figure that that's going to kind of dip down or go down from the regular season, but so far the numbers have been great. And again, thank you all to all the listeners, all the podcast viewers on the YouTube channel. Thank you all for your support. I really appreciate it. So since it is the 2-year anniversary of me taking over as your host of Locked On LA Kings, it seemed appropriate to look back to see where we were 2 years ago when I took over hosting the show to where we are now. And back when I took over the show, the Kings were coming off of Todd McClellan's first winning season in LA. The Kings were back in the playoffs for the first time in 3 years. Now, they lost to the Edmonton Oilers in 7 games in the first round. Jonathan Quick was still on the team, and we were all worried if Quentin Byfield and Gabe Vilardi were ever going to turn into solid NHL players as former first-round draft picks. Well, 2 years later, McClellan is looking for work with another team. We'll talk more about that later on. Jonathan Quick is on his 3rd team since being traded out of LA, and Quentin Byfield and Gabe Vilardi have turned into solid NHL players, although Vilardi is now doing it with the Winnipeg Jets. So a lot can change in 2 years. As I took over the show, I was pretty optimistic about where the Kings were and that they were headed in the right direction. But after 2 seasons and 2 more playoff losses to the Oilers, the Kings have failed to gain or sustain any momentum from that season 2 years ago. How has that happened exactly? Well, clearly 2 years ago, the Kings organization was feeling pretty good about themselves, as we all were, and decided to make a couple of moves to get better, to win a playoff series and maybe contend for a Stanley Cup title. GM Rob Blake made a major trade, acquiring talented forward Kevin Fiala from the Minnesota Wild in exchange for former first-round draft pick defenseman Brock Faber and another first-round pick in 22 that would turn into forward prospect Liam Ogren, who just made his NHL debut for the Wild this past season, appearing in 4 games. We don't know how good he's going to be, but we do know that Faber's pretty good. He was runner-up for the Calder Trophy this past year as Rookie of the Year and appears to be a very talented second-pairing defenseman for the Minnesota Wild for many years to come. So the Kings certainly paid a price for Kevin Fiala, but I think you got to give to get. And Fiala, I think, has worked out well in LA. He has been one of the top scorers on the team in his 2 years since the trade. 72 points the first year, 73 points last year. So I think the trade has been a win-win for both teams, in my opinion. Now, with Fiala, the Kings improved from 99 points to 104 points the next year and made the playoffs again. Blake went out during the season at the trade deadline, picked up defenseman Vladislav Gavrikov and goalie Jonas Korpisalo from the Columbus Blue Jackets for goalie Jonathan Quick, and a first-round pick in 2023 that turned into defenseman Oliver Bonk, who's now on the Philadelphia Flyers, and a third-round pick in 2024. Gavrikov was signed to an extension and has helped to shore up the Kings' defense. Korpisalo ended up not working out and left after the season in free agency. The Kings would lose again to the Edmonton Oilers in the first round. Although it was 6 games, it felt like it was actually a more competitive series than the series that went 7 games the year before. And the Kings had a 2-1 series lead. They ended up losing game 4 on home ice in overtime. Then the Oilers won the next 2. And that was that. Still, optimism was pretty high for the Kings going into this past season. That's when things took a turn. The Kings would end up trading away goalie Cal Peterson, who was struggling. LA wanted to shit itself of that $5 million per season contract that they were paying Peterson to basically be an AHL goalie. They did find someone to be willing to take that contract off their hands. That was the Philadelphia Flyers, but the price the Kings paid to move Cal Peterson out of the organization was to give up defenseman Sean Walker, who later turned into a first-round pick for the Flyers. They also gave up prospect Helga Granz and a second-round pick in 2024. LA also had to retain some of the salary of defenseman Ivan Provorov, who's in Columbus. It was part of a 3-team deal that involved the Blue Jackets as well. Rob Blake then shipped out young defenseman Sean Dursey to the Arizona Coyotes for a second-round pick. Blake then traded Gabe Vilardi, Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kupari, and that second-round pick acquired in the Dursey trade to the Winnipeg Jets for Pierre-Luc Dubois. He then signed Dubois to an 8-year, $85 million contract. LA never seemed to really have a plan with Dubois, and Dubois didn't exactly pull his share of his weight as well when he joined the team. The trade hurt the Kings depth-wise, and they ended up giving up a lot of assets in the process to get to where they were, to where they are going into this past season. Obviously, the move did not pay off. The team was struggling to hold on to a playoff spot going into the All-Star break. The Kings end up firing Todd McClellan. Now, LA would make it back into the playoffs for a 3rd straight year, but were easily defeated this time, once again, by the Edmonton Oilers, this time in 5 games. Pierre-Luc Dubois ends up being traded away to the Washington Capitals for Darcy Kemper, and that's where the Kings pretty much stand now. Now, I said at the time of some of these moves, I like my general manager to be aggressive. I want them to be bold. I want them to not just always sit back and say, well, let's see how things work out. Try to be proactive, try to make things happen. But clearly, the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade was a mistake. It was a bad move, and it has set the Kings back. Now, that move probably should have cost Rob Blake his job. It didn't. So the situation we now find ourselves in 2 years later, Rob Blake's on the hot seat. We're going into the final year of his contract as general manager. We have an unproven head coach in Jim Hiller, who's had the interim tag removed and is now the head coach. And it seems like the Kings are a bubble team to make the playoffs. It is amazing how things can change quickly as we head into a very uncertain season for the LA Kings. It has been interesting covering the Kings over these past 2 seasons, and we'll see what the next season has in store for the LA Kings. So how should the Kings approach this upcoming season? We'll talk about that next year on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Drive, passion, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy also is what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, LED headlights, exhaust kits, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it is easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. So the LA Kings are in a bit of an odd spot going into this coming season. They have a new head coach who has never been a full-time NHL head coach before. Yes, Jim Hiller did get some valuable experience as interim coach. Obviously, he was an assistant. He knows this team, so he's not going in completely cold. But again, he is now an NHL full-time head coach for the first time in his career, going into an offseason, going into a training camp. Clearly, there's going to be changes to the lineup, changes to the structure of the team, strategy changes. How long will the transition period last between Jim Hiller and the Kings? And are those changes going to be effective? Now, there are young players that are being counted on for this coming season. Clearly, players like Alex Turcotte, Akil Thomas, Brandt Clark, Jordan Spence, Alex Laferriere, and possibly Samuel Fagemo are going to play important roles for the Kings this upcoming season. All of them are either going into their second NHL season or essentially their rookie NHL seasons. How they are handled, what role they're going to play, what their ice time is going to be like, are all going to be very key factors into how much success they will have and how much they can contribute to the Kings next season. And then you have Quinton Byfield, experienced, but still very young. Matter of fact, he's younger than all the players I just mentioned, except for Brandt Clark. Does Quinton Byfield play on the wing or at center? If he plays center, does he play on the second or the third line? After the solid NHL season that he had, but his first solid NHL season, is he ready for the added responsibility of playing the center position full time? All key questions for the team and for Quinton Byfield. But of all the players that I just mentioned, the one I have the biggest question mark about is Samuel Fagemo. How good is he really? Is he ready to contribute at the NHL level? Now, he was second in the American Hockey League in goal scoring with 43 goals. That's not nothing. I mean, that's impressive. But how impressive is it really? Now, if you've been a Kings fan for a little while, you might remember the name Andy Andreoff. Now, he was with the Kings from 2014 to 2018 for parts of 4 seasons in LA, and he was the epitome of a jag. He was just a guy. Nothing special at all, with all due respect. And Andy Andreoff led the AHL in goal scoring the year before Samuel Fagemo with another organization when he had 37 goals. He's now playing overseas, so he didn't parlay that big goal scoring season into even an NHL job somewhere on a fourth line. He played a handful of games with the Kings. I talked about another player you probably remember was in the Kings organization in Ontario, and that was Martin Ferk. He was second in the AHL in goal scoring with 40 goals the season before Andreoff. He played a handful of games for the Kings over parts of 3 seasons, but he never got back into the NHL after that 40-goal season. I think he's still kicking around somewhere in the AHL. Now, that doesn't mean that Samuel Fagemo can't be a solid NHL goal scorer, but it does go to show you that scoring a lot of goals in the AHL doesn't necessarily translate to scoring a lot of goals in the NHL. Now, granted, Andy Andreoff, Martin Ferk, and likely Samuel Fagemo, they were getting first line or second line minutes in the AHL. They're not going to get those minutes in the NHL. So that certainly plays a factor. You can't score goals if you're not on the ice, and if you're playing with lesser teammates, so on and so forth. That having been said, the Kings do need to find out what Samuel Fagemo has or doesn't have. The worst case scenario would be for him to never get a real chance in LA. He goes away somewhere else, does finally get the opportunity, and succeeds. And the Kings would have lost a legitimate NHL asset without ever knowing whether he could play or not. They have to give him a legitimate chance, in my opinion, playing in the top 9 and stick with him for a significant number of games. If it doesn't work out, if he doesn't produce, at least you have your answer as to whether he's likely an NHL player or not. And then you can go from there. Kind of a wild card in all this is Arthur Kaliev for a couple of different reasons. Now, the way the Kings have handled Arthur Kaliev over the last couple of years has been a bit of a mystery. They never really seem to say, we're going to give you a legitimate chance in the top 9, and we're going to keep you there for a while to really see what you can do, kind of like they need to do with Samuel Fagemo. So Kaliev, doesn't get the minutes, doesn't get a ton of confidence moving around the lineup. And look, that was under Todd McClellan for the most part. And Jim Hiller, kind of took over, was in a tough spot as far as how he had to handle things. I don't know if there's possibly a good resolution between the Kings and Arthur Kaliev. Now, he's been offered a contract. They're still negotiating as to what that contract's going to be as a restricted free agent. But he is going to be with the Kings as far as his next contract. But then, are they going to trade him? He's requested a trade. It's hard to, when a guy says he doesn't want to be in your team anymore, usually a pretty indication he's not going to be there for long. But what if Jim Hiller and Rob Blake go to Arthur Kaliev and say, let's give this a fresh start. You've got a new coach. We're going to finally give you that chance to show what you can do. Maybe they could convince Artie to give it one more try in LA. We'll see. Either way, the Kings need to find out about a guy like Samuel Fagemo and give him our opportunity to succeed or fail. Now, that could even come at the cost of what might be is in the best for the team short term. How these young players are going to play, what kind of opportunity they're going to get, I think could go a long way in determining the near future for the LA Kings. The problem with that is also you've got a GM who's on the hot seat going into the final year of his contract. You've got a first-year head coach that wants to prove that he can win at the NHL level. And you've got arguably the greatest LA King of all time, Anze Kopitar, going into the first year of a 2-year contract, which could be the final 2 years he plays in the NHL. And none of those things necessarily factor into a team that's patient. We saw the Kings not be patient and arguably try and rush things, making a trade like the trade for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Maybe that is a lesson learned. Maybe they've figured out that's not the best course of action, that we need to be more patient, maybe slow things down a bit, see what these young guys can do. We'll see if a lesson has been learned or not for the LA Kings, and we'll see what the future holds for guys like Arthur Kaliev and Samuel Fagemo with the LA Kings. We've got news on a couple of former Kings. We'll tell you about that next year on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. I have purchased tickets using Gametime to NFL, college football, and NHL games, and I am a very satisfied customer. The app is super easy to use and easy to navigate. Just go on and tap the listings, sports, music, shows, and they'll list the tickets with the best deals. And it's easy to search for tickets for teams and events, and you get the lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL, and get $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Well, we talked about the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade and how that did not work out for the Kings, to say the least. He's now in Washington, and former Kings defenseman Matt Roy is once again his teammate, having signed a free agent deal with the Capitals. Now, the media in D.C. apparently has been grilling Matt Roy about Pierre-Luc Dubois and his reputation, as he's now on his 4th team in 4 years. And you can take it for what it's worth, but Matt Roy has at least publicly gone to bat for Pierre-Luc Dubois, telling the media in D.C., quote, "I feel like the media paints this picture of him, and to me, it couldn't be further from the truth. He's a great teammate. He's a great locker room guy. He gets along well with everybody. In terms of all that, I don't know where the media is getting all this stuff. If I hated the guy, I probably wouldn't have come to Washington," end quote. Well, I don't know about that. I think Matt Roy was going to go to wherever the team was going to offer him the most money, regardless of who his teammates were. But look, I'm not going to say that Matt Roy is not being truthful, but at the same time, what is he going to say? Is he going to throw Pierre-Luc Dubois under the bus as he's just joining a new team, as they both are just joining a new team? No, of course not. So, that said, I will say I never heard any Kings players. I never saw them seem to dislike Pierre-Luc Dubois. PLD he wasn't a bad guy. He seemed like a good teammate. I have even admitted that, when he talked, he certainly came off like he was a decent guy. He said a lot of the right things, and to his credit, he never ducked the media when things weren't going the way that he and the Kings wanted him to go. He always answered the questions. But at the same time, his track record on the ice is what it is. You notice that Matt Roy didn't really say anything about his on ice play and how Kings and his teammates felt about that. But it is very interesting to see how Pierre-Luc Dubois is going to work out in DC, what kind of opportunity he gets there, and how he does after a rough time in Los Angeles. Speaking of former Kings, we mentioned him earlier in the show, but it looks like former Kings head coach Todd McClellan was lined up to be the coach and fill the final head coaching vacancy in the NHL and be the next head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets. However, apparently that is now off. Aaron Portzline of The Athletic reported that T-Mac, the Blue Jackets, and the Kings couldn't agree on a deal to have McClellan join Columbus. Now, what do the Kings have to do with this? Well, McClellan is still under contract with the Kings for next season. LA actually on the hook for $5.5 million. Apparently, the Blue Jackets and the Kings couldn't come to an agreement on how much of the remaining salary that he has would the Kings pay and how much would the Blue Jackets pay. Clearly, the Blue Jackets were not interested in paying Todd McClellan $5.5 million per season, which is one of the highest coaching salaries in the NHL. I think it's the highest that's at least on record. Not all the coaching salaries have been released to the public. So if Columbus said, yeah, we'll pay him $5.5 million, then that decision is easy. Clearly, the reason they were negotiating is because they didn't want to pay that much. So either way for Todd McClellan, he's going to get his money. Where it all comes from remains to be seen. And we'll see if maybe the two sides eventually come to some kind of agreement or not. But I to be honest, I don't really get this from the Kings side. They're going to have to pay him one way or another. Why not have another team pick up part of the salary? Let's say the Blue Jackets are willing to pay $2 million of the $5 million. That's $2 million you don't have to pay. So why not go for that? Otherwise, you just have to pay the whole amount. So I'm not sure what the sticking point is. I'm not sure what that was all about. But apparently, as it stands right now, it looked like Todd McClellan was going to be the next head coach of Columbus. But apparently, that is not going to happen. We'll see if things change going forward. Finally, I did want to give a get well soon to friend of the show, Jim Fox, the former Kings player and longtime analyst, just had his second knee replacement surgery. If you're on X or Twitter, you may have seen him post video of him walking around on crutches after that second knee surgery. I know when he had his first knee replacement, we had a conversation with him because my wife was also about to have her first knee replacement surgery. Seems like Foxy's recovery went a lot better than Mrs. Garcia, who had a pretty tough time with it, so much so that she has said she's not going to get the other knee done. But Jim Fox did. Just wanted to wish him all the best in his recovery, and I'm sure we will get Foxy on the show at some point before the upcoming season to get his thoughts on what's going on with the LA Kings and what it looks like for next season. Hey, for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, of course, coming up tomorrow on a Feedback Friday, we are going to read your emails and get your feedback on what's going on with the LA Kings. Again, just like the show numbers as far as listens and downloads and views have been great this offseason. I've been very happy with the number of emails we're getting every week. People are still have a lot to say, want to have their say on the Kings. So that's obviously great to have those feedback shows, give you your chance to get some emails in. We do have a pretty full box, but we still have room for more. If you want to get an email in before Friday's show, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE, and have your voice be heard for the fan feedback show coming up tomorrow. As for social media, love for you to stay interactive with us there. X, Twitter, Instagram, we are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you on Friday. And as always, go, Kings, go.